Hey everyone, welcome to the Ganjha Show. Our guest for the day is Deepak Anand. It's quite an honor to have him on the show, first of all. Uh, um, he's an Indian guy, he's born in Mumbai. I've stayed in Bombay for 5 years. The city is amazing. Post that, he went to Canada, which is something that I'm also looking to do. So that kind of uh, resonates with me a lot. But he's had some great experiences working for more than 10 years in the pharmaceutical industry and being the founder and executive director of a medical marijuana association in Canada, which is very much needed in India. And now he's the founder of and CEO of Materia. They work with medical cannabis across the world. And welcome to the show, Deepak. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Vipin. Very excited to be here.
Sure. Yeah, just what we were discussing before the podcast, the sort of internationality of the cannabis industry. I actually did not know that Canadian companies are expanding so rapidly in different European countries. I mean, why is that the case? I was just reading the article, Forbes articles that you had contributed to. I mean, why is that the case? Is it because the growing laws are not so good in Europe?
Yeah, look, first of all, Canada has really done quite a bit with respect to the globalization of cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
We're the first G7 country and the first G20 country to have legalized cannabis at a federal level or national level, which is a significant milestone. You haven't seen any of the countries look at legalization at that level, particularly in the United States. You've got a number of states that have legalized cannabis for both medical and non-medical purposes, but you really haven't seen this international element of legalization, which is a whole other ball game, right? I was very, very close to the government of Canada when they were legalizing cannabis first for medical purposes, then for recreational purposes. And I think what Canada has done is really understood what the international complexities are with respect to
Mm-hmm.
the trade of cannabis. Cannabis is a controlled substance. It sits on the single convention of narcotic drugs. And so there's a number of things that need to be considered when you're trying to deal with the movement of cannabis between countries and across borders. It's one thing to do it domestically within your own borders, and then there's a whole other ballgame to do it internationally. So I think Canada's done that really well. I think what that's resulted in is really two things. I think it's created people and products. I think it's created a whole human intelligence and a workforce that has worked on cannabis from a regulatory side, from a policy side, from a production side, and that's what we're taking internationally. And so I think when I've had the fortune to be in the industry now for just over 7 years in Canada and look at it from its infancy all the way up until the stage that it is now. And so as we look at international markets, one of the reasons that we decided to go to Germany, to answer your question, and to the UK and Malta, was just because there was nobody that was looking at this seriously in those markets. And on the flip side, there was a lot of demand for product, right? We've got over 15,000 kilos of cannabis just in the German market alone that's being sold in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a sizable demand. And so, the companies that were doing it were either Canadian companies that had grown too big, like Canopy and Aurora and Tilray, that were selling products into that market, but not really looking at it from, what is it that German patients want. And so we looked at it from a regional approach and penetrated it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most interesting about the cannabis industry, right? It is something that we haven't experienced since decades, I think. No industry that is working in one country is sort of legal and illegal in some other country. So I think that's an amazing point that and it's sort of India will have to a lot of catching up to do if they don't legalize it. As early as possible. They will have all the talent that is in Canada and US, sort of, that we'll have to follow all of those models. Steering away from the conversation, what do your parents sort of think of you coming into the cannabis industry as an Indian? Has it been a little bit of stigma from their side? And if you don't mind sharing, do they use it for medicinal purposes?
Yeah, so look, my whole family is in India, and nobody in my family has really used cannabis for any purposes. There's still, quite frankly, a lot of stigma. I mean, I don't
Hmm.
think my parents fully understand or appreciate what it is that I do. I think they've now started to understand that I'm working in a legal atmosphere, but the stigma
Hmm.
is real and serious, and I think this is a challenge that we as South Asians and Indians particularly face, right? I think that there's this overhanging challenge because we've been told that drugs are bad through our whole lives, right, growing up in society, and it's very hard to change the mindset of 70, 80-year-old people at this point. It's
Yeah.
just not going to happen, right? So that's a very real and live conversation, Vipin, that I think people often, at least in the Western world, don't really seem to speak about much, because it's here it's taken for granted that we've had legal cannabis now for 10 years for
Hmm.
medical purposes in Canada, and for just over 2 years now for recreational purposes. But it is it is a live challenge for sure.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, lot of kids and a lot of adults also stay, I meant teenagers and adults stay with their parents for a longer period, even after getting married, things like that. And these are some social issues that we as a country would constantly keep facing, even if we legalize to a certain extent. And in fact, like you said, the Sushant Singh Rajput's case, I mean, it sort of, created so much bad image in terms of it's sort of echo chambers, right? If anybody had a bad image of cannabis, now it's worse because it was used by a celebrity in Bollywood mafia and so many different things. Um, yeah.
Yeah, Vipin, I was just going to say, how sad is it that we as even Indian society and as Indians, promote the consumption of alcohol. You are almost, it's very common for someone my age to sit with my dad and have, a
Yeah.
glass of wine or a glass of beer or whiskey or whatever the case may be. And it's almost encouraged and promoted and celebrated, right? Whether it be around festivals, whether it be around traditions, whatever it might be, right? But the fact that we are stigmatizing the use of cannabis to this extent is actually quite unfortunate. I think it's actually much more unfortunate for those patients that are using it for medical purposes and for therapeutic purposes. And I think you look at the depression pandemic that's actually occurring right now is quite unfortunate. And I think if there are people that can benefit from this product, I think we do them disservice when we start to stigmatize these sorts of products and really the phenomenon of cannabis. And I think one of the things that people really fully haven't understood is, the substance was legal. We do have an endocannabinoid system in each and
Yeah.
every one of our bodies. There's no disputing or debating that. It's not like you've got an alcohol system in your body that, will process alcohol and suddenly, magical things will happen in your body. We've got an endocannabinoid system. And I think, the fact that we aren't really following science is a bit unfortunate. And I say this across the board. I don't mean to say this just on India alone, but I think India just perpetuates that culture. And I think generally Asia seems to follow. I mean, China, Korea, Singapore, Thailand. Thailand's now started to legalize, but generally, the whole region seems to really stigmatize this product quite unfortunately.
Yeah, talking about education, I mean, you have a course, you're teaching a course on about cannabis. How has that been for you? And do you think it has helped a lot of people? Like the sort of feedback that you've gotten from people after teaching that, how has it helped them? Yeah.
Respect
Yeah.
to your comment on education, one of the reasons that I first approached the institution here in Canada, it was, by the way, it was the first course in the world that had been done at a university level, period.
Yeah.
And so it was, again, there was a lot of stigma, there was a lot of board approvals, there's a lot of ethics approvals that we had to go through. But I was like, guys, like, this is going to be an international course. We're talking about doing these things in a central or a national or federal basis, and everyone's going to be very interested in understanding how do you comply with this. And so the course was taken by people around the world. We had coverage on every major news station, and it was a significant achievement to be able to go out and educate people on that. And I think one of the big things that has come about is we still don't have enough education, whether it be on the research side, whether it be on the pharma side, whether it be even on the cultivation side. We need to be doing more education and kind of teaching people more and more about the plant and all of its benefits and how to cultivate it and how to sell it and how to export it and how to do all of these things in a compliant
Hmm.
fashion. So I think that's a very, very important conversation.
if you talk about industries, sort of coming back to the education part, like people have no idea what blockchain is, what cryptocurrencies is. It's not even into mainstream education. A lot of new ed tech companies in India are sort of coming up with new courses. Do you think that would be, just touching upon the education subject a little bit more, that would be the future of education in terms of a decentralized, non, university or college based education? It's mostly focused on the teacher, who's expert in his field, and the students who want to learn from them. Yeah.
I think so. I think there's definitely interest for that, Vipin. And there's a lot of interest in that in India as well, right? I mean, I think what people are losing sight of is, people are looking at us, and I consider us as being non people from India, and I don't mean people of Indian origin, but I mean Westerners, to tell us about the plant. I think it's actually quite backwards. You've got cultivators in Himachal that have been growing this product for entire generations, right? That know how to extract, process, cultivate, do all of those different things way better than us in the West, quote unquote, know how to do, right? We've taken this plant and we've kind of made some unique things. I think it's very important to highlight how these things are actually being done in India and what actually is happening there, and to be able to promote it, right? India has some interesting landrace strains that are indigenous to the country that have tremendous benefit, right? And I think we need to be showcasing that on the international stage. So yes, as much as we from the outside can be coming to India to impart and provide some awareness, I certainly think on the regulatory side, there's a lot that we can bring in. But on the cultivation side, on kind of cannabis as a plant, and it's been in the Vedas, it's been in a variety of different cultures and traditions for far longer than it's been out here in the West. I think there's a lot that we can actually adopt. So I think it's really a merging and a combining of both those two different things, and saying, let's learn from the regulatory side from the West. How have they gone about regulating it? How are they exporting something that is a narcotic product into different countries? But let's also take all the benefits in places like India. I mean, Malana cream has been around for a very long time, right? You've had bhang available for a very, very long time in India, and people have been sadhus have been using it for decades. So let's kind of bring those two things together. I think there's a really, really good opportunity here for India to be able to excel at the global stage, right? At bringing those things together. But I think the regulatory side is really interesting, and I think that's quite frankly, Vipin, where India has lacked. I think unfortunately we aren't that great with respect to embracing policy regulations. I think governments have it's always been driven by an agenda on behalf of the industry, or it's always been something that hasn't really been taken on. So I think there's a real mind shift that needs to change. And looking at this Sushant Singh case, unfortunately, and looking at the news, it really makes my heart sink when you look at things like this, because it's you're not having the right conversation. You're not targeting drug dealers and drug peddlers. You're actually targeting what people call users, I call consumers. That's kind of what you need to look at. That's the fundamental shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the media coverage for the CBD oil, only I think 2 or 3 interviews happened with the Indian cannabis industry guys. Apart from that, there were like millions of interviews happening every day, constantly bashing the plant and constantly bashing what is happening. And that's sort of disrespecting your old culture, I think. I mean, not making that connection. Only few, I couldn't say, even the same publications had 2 different agendas and 2 different narratives for the same plant. And I think that happens a lot, like whitewashing of our own culture. That is sort of, I think, is happening a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. One of the things I was going to say is, it's important to understand, forget the fact that there might be benefits in cannabis, forget about the therapeutic benefit, forget about all of that. Just on a human basis alone, just understand that you're not going to be able to arrest your way out of this problem. You're not going to be able to put enough people in jail for a major impact to happen, right? Because you've got today, as you speak, hundreds and thousands of millions of people in India that are using CBD oil, that are using cannabis, whether it be for medical purposes or for recreational purposes. So if you think you're going to be able to arrest all these people and put them in jail, and then you're going to be addressing the issue, it is just not going to happen, right? We've seen this in countries like Canada. Our health minister famously went to the United Nations and said, she said, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. So we need to find a different approach. We need to find a public health approach to this, because the fact is that people are consuming or using it. The fact is that kids under the age of 18 are consuming this product. It's not a benign substance. It has effects on the developing brain. There are some serious health consequences. So one of the arguments that Canada made for legalization was that we've got 12 and 13-year-old kids in this country that are using and have access to cannabis that should absolutely not be on cannabis, right? So
Yeah.
the only way that we're going to be able to address that issue is if we legalize it and have a conversation. Because if you're going to say it's illegal, people are still going to access it. And I think this is where the disconnect is mainly in India, is that you can get all of Bollywood, you can get all of these A-listers in different places and different industries, and you can put them all into jail. It's not going to address the issue. It's going to make really good media highlights. But if you think
Yeah.
it's going to take the cannabis problem away, it's not. It's just not. That's just not going to happen. That's a fool's game to try and chase that.
Yeah, I mean, just in last podcast, I was discussing like the existence of a black market actually is deterrent to what people are trying to do, right? You just shared this article where within the 2 years of recreational legalization in Canada, the usage within the age of, I think, 14 to 18 has gone down. That is because the access gets limited to a certain extent. The your roadside dealer is not going to ask your age, not going to ask you about your ID, things like that. And in fact, like so many challenges of illicit market of something like I'm not saying that you should legalize drugs altogether, but of something that exists, like that grows in naturally across India. It's sort of unimaginable for someone like us who trying to, like, for me at least, that I'm just learning about the industry, but you have been there for so long. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of mind boggling, and something should happen. I think currently the government has created this committee for amendments in NDPS Act. The deadline for that is 17th of November. I'm just encouraging people to write in. I'm hopefully going to get an Indian lawyer on board to understand what is happening and how can we sort of, push the government towards the right path. Nudge, I can't say push. We can only nudge them to a certain extent. But yes.
Yeah, what I might say on that, Vipin, is, and I've had the fortune to be, quite a bit involved on social media, and I think one of the things that we inherently, and I can say this as Indians, don't do well is collaborate, right? We tend
Yeah.
to go into silos and do our own things, and I'm not going to share it with you because you're going to then compete with me. And the fact of the matter is, if there's no industry, there's going to be nothing to compete with. So
Yeah.
you better all get on the same page and try and do this together. So when you say I want to work with a lawyer, there's a couple of lawyers in Himachal that have been doing some amazing work with respect to cannabis and cannabis possession, cannabis amnesty. And I feel like the need for a collaborative industry association that represents all kinds of industry that works as one voice is critical at this juncture. And you mentioned the NDPS review and kind of, putting in submissions. I completely encourage people to put their submissions in, but I feel like you need to almost do this as a combined collaborative effort. Don't worry about competing, because if this is going to continue to be stigmatized and treated as a narcotic, there's going to be nothing to compete on. So don't worry about something that isn't there. Like, worry about trying to mainstream something today, right? As opposed to trying to get into these silos and, I'm going to get a license and, someone else is not going to get a license. And so, working on that game, and more importantly, trying to call for enforcement and trying to shut people down, I think is not really going to do anybody any favors. I think we need to collectively as an industry all band together and really tell the government, like, this is kind of what we think are policy errors. And let's not forget, most importantly, patients, and let's keep them at the front and center, because there really isn't an industry, and I think we do people a huge disservice by not including them in the conversation. So I think if you start to get patients in the mix, I think you're going to have this humanitarian, compassionate argument, which industry, quite frankly, is never going to be able to make to the same level. So I think that also needs to be added to the mix. And what I'm seeing particularly evolved in India is a very business-centric approach to the legalization of cannabis, which in my mind would be quite unfortunate if you don't include patients in this conversation.
Yeah. No, exactly. I've seen that a lot in India, and it happens a lot. Like I said, I mean, it's so easy to get people from West for as simple thing as a podcast. I mean, right? and it 100% happens, like people not willing to share. I would definitely credit Bohiko for sharing as much as possible. They try and be in conversations. The very less people like that who are trying to be in different conversation and still trying to be a part of an industry where people are sort of fighting with each other rather than growing together. Like you said, there's nothing right now, right? It's
Yeah.
not, yeah. What
And
like
also, Vipin, like, don't tell me that there's no kids with pediatric epilepsy in India. Don't tell me that there
hmm,
isn't people that have serious health issues that, that we've seen in the West. I mean, you look at news articles from the UK right now. You look at Billy Caldwell, Charlotte Caldwell, and a variety of other kids and patients that are in the front and center of the news that are demanding access from the government. Don't tell me these problems don't exist in India, because I'm not buying it, right? But I'm
yeah.
not seeing it. I haven't seen one patient in India come forward and say that I need to use cannabis, or I have been using cannabis for medical purposes, and you can put me in jail. But the fact is, like, that, I'm going to die if I'm not on this medicine. And if we're not able to bring this down to that level, quote unquote, it's going to be very hard for governments to see what the argument and the issue, because you've got this concern amongst regulators and government as well, that they don't want to be looked at serving the needs of industry, right? So they're
Hmm.
not what they don't want to legalize a quote unquote a drug or a substance that has negative outcomes, because industry is putting pressure onto them. But when you put a patient in front of them, that's a whole other conversation. Are you going to argue with a mother of a 8-year-old child that has 100 seizures a day, that those seizures didn't go down to one? And do you want to throw that mother into jail because she's now giving her child medicine and she's seeing his seizures go down from 100 to one seizure a day? I mean, go ahead, right? I mean, you as government, are you going to arrest that person? I mean, can you imagine the backlash that would come out from something like that? So I think that's the conversation that needs to be happening. I think you get way more mileage by something like that. Than any argument that industry can make for any dollar sign, right? And that's the right reason, most importantly, Vipin. It needs to be done for the right reasons, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you have put out to be pondered upon, and essentially, like, even a lot of the things that you have said has sort of impacted me in a way to think in a different manner, and to be able to appreciate, first of all, what India is doing in certain ways, and to be able to go to a right path, not always keep chasing the dollars. It could be a good way to catch the headlines, right? Like a $25 billion industry, whatever. But the main focus should always remain the promoting wellness and health of a lot of patients. I mean, I have had a lot of family members suffer from cancer. A few of them have died as well, and I constantly keep thinking, if cannabis was there to help them in some or the other way, because I've seen them suffering so much. Uh, how different could it be, right? And once you, and there's always somebody in your family who's suffering because of like cancer is a crazy disease. So somebody who's suffered so much, and I think that's one of the most relatable thing for people to be able to connect to, most of all. Yeah, thank you, Deepak, thank you so much for coming on the show. Great conversation.